I am Rue, and welcome back to my Booktube channel, Rue with the Books. If you are new here, then I hope that you enjoy your stay, and if you've been here before, welcome back. It's good to have you here again. Goodness, it's been a long time since the last Talking Books episode, eh? For those of you that are new here, Talking Books is a series I work on in which I talk about the books that I have read, the books that I am currently reading, as well as the books that I plan to read. Although for spooky season, I did change up the format a little bit, because in the last Talking Books episode, I only did my TBR as opposed to the adding on what I'm reading and what I plan to read. So it was like a bit of like a kind of getting spooky season going. So in this video, I will talk about all of the books that I mentioned I would be reading in the last video and give my thoughts on them. If you haven't seen a Talking Books episode before, then don't worry. It's not a series in which you need to watch episode 2 to get what happens in episode 5. You can just choose whichever ones you want to watch when you feel like it, so don't worry about that. But if you like my voice and do want to watch some more Talking Books episodes, then you can find a playlist where all of them are compiled into one neat place, so you can hear me yap about more books. If you could take a moment to press that like button to send me far and wide across the YouTube algorithm, I would really appreciate it. And while you're down there, you can press the subscribe button too if you want more Rue with the Books book content in your subscription feed. Now, be sure to go grab a beverage to help you enjoy this video, because it is cold, it is getting colder, the leaves are falling off the trees, it might be snowing where you live, and the air it's got that sting to it. So you need something nice and hot, like a nice cup of coffee or tea or a hot chocolate, to help bring you back to that warm, cozy feeling we're trying to foster here. And now, without any further ado, let's talk about some books. Pet Sematary is a story about Lewis Creed, who moves into a new town with his family. This town is in a pretty rural area with a lot of superstition and folklore surrounding it, because it's on an old Native American territory. The reason he moves into this town is to start a new job as a lead practitioner for a university. Pet Sematary is a very mundane story. Now, I don't mean that to say that it is boring, because it's definitely not. But what I do mean to say is that it follows a man essentially in the day-to-day life, covering things like what his job is like, what his experience of raising his children is, what it's like to be a family man, and how he builds his relationships with his peers and his neighbors. I think this aspect of the story is very relatable, because none of us are like superheroes or ghost hunters or stuff like that. We do know how to work a job, focus on family, and things like that. Despite the fact that the story is very mundane, it's got some phenomenal pacing. Just as you start getting a false sense of security, Stephen King pulls something out of his bag of tricks to reel you right back in. The horror in this book works on several levels. There are some emotionally charged moments, some gruesome, shocking moments, some kind of supernatural twists here and there. There's something that appeals to various types of horror fans, and that's fantastic in my opinion, because no matter who you are, there's probably something that you can pull from this story that just shakes you to your core. On the topic of there being a little bit of everything in this book, it is somewhat of a cozy story at times, because Lewis does spend a lot of time with his neighbor, Judd Crandall, when he is done with looking after his children for the day. So, they go to bed and everything. And they have a very nice, heartwarming relationship. I think it's a nice trope to have that wise elderly neighbor that you can rely on, because it's kind of it's something we all know. Most of us have read a story with either a kind of a mentor or kind of wise old man kind of character. It is a pretty common trope, and so it feels kind of like we know it. So yeah, Judd does what he can to assist Lewis and shows that he deeply cares for him. They form a very tight-knit bond over a very short period of time. But just because I said that it is cozy doesn't mean that this book is a walk in the park. This book is very, very disturbing at times too. What I enjoyed most about this book is Lewis Creed's character voice, which I have learned is, character voice itself is something that I can quite consistently rely on Stephen King for giving me. Lewis's internal monologue is constantly engaging, ranging from witty and funny to kind of like desperate, emotionally charged, depending on what's happening. He is quite a kind of a bit of a mug, to be honest. He's a bit of a mean character. A lot of the things he says out loud are quite messed up and mean, considering the fact that he does work in kind of caring for people. So there is kind of that ironic aspect there. But yeah, so he experiences the whole range of emotions that a human does. So we know what it's like to be him. He's a very real, very authentic character. He is so authentically human, just breathing life into the pages of this book. So yeah, I've said a lot of great things about this book. The final 30% or so of this story was actually absolutely bonkers. It just started going just crazy with the pacing. You were constantly engaged and gripped and just want to know what happens next. And I think best of all, Stephen King absolutely nailed the ending. I was just so captivated with what was going on, and I loved the ending. I remember it so vividly. So yeah, overall, I rated this book 5 stars out of 5. Fever House is a book that I've had my eyes on for quite a while since its release. Something about the cover just drew me in like a moth to a flame. The kind of black and white of the rock hand against the red, because red's my favorite color, to where the author's name is, that kind of sprayed effect with the brush. It's such a beautiful work of art that I knew since I saw that cover and I read the synopsis. I was like, this book sounds fantastic. I'm going to have to read it at some point, and I'm glad I finally did, although I did have to push aside some stuff on the TBR to fit it in, because up until maybe like a month before spooky season, I didn't really have a spooky season TBR planned out. So I shoved everything aside and crammed in a load of horror books that I've been anticipating reading, and yeah, Bob's your uncle. This book is an absolutely brilliant apocalyptic tale with a very interesting premise. It's about a secret government agency essentially losing control of a severed hand that makes people kind of enter these like berserker rages. And now, if people become victims to these violent outbursts with the severed hand in close proximity, they pretty much turn into zombies. It's a very gripping story because it's kind of like a cat and mouse game between who is currently in ownership of the severed hand and the covert government agency who are trying to get it back. It's a race against time, which ups the stakes and makes it more gripping, because the longer that the hand is out in public for, the lower the chance of containing what it's able to do, and the smaller the ability to mitigate the damage and the chaos that it can unfold. Now, if that doesn't sound interesting enough, well, there is a big family mystery sub-story that you get little crumbs of here and there throughout the book. As we ramp up towards the ending, the way the mystery is handled just crescendos with big moments, big reveals. This book does so much to keep you gripped. It's a story that truly keeps you at the edge of your seat. It's so different to Pet Sematary in practically every single way, which was why it was so good to read this after it, because I got just a completely different story with different pacing, different vibes. Everything about it is just a complete 180 degree. It's just so different and so good. Something I enjoyed about this story was the variety in the characters and how Keith Rosson handles them. We have violent debt collectors, we have artifact hunters, we have mob bosses, we have parents with kids, we have kids with problematic parents, we have hackers and spies, we have addicts and police officers. There's essentially characters that fit into so many groups in this book, and it's very interesting to see how these various different kinds of characters react to the situation, because of course the priorities that a police officer without parents would have in that situation is very different to the priorities that a parent with kids has, and it's very different to the kind of priorities that a mob boss has and that kind of thing. So it's very interesting to see the way that all these different people handle life in this very chaotic, uncontrollable, crazy situation. This book takes a while to get into the plot, but it's worth it for every moment, because while Keith Rosson isn't progressing the plot, he is taking time to flesh out his characters and make you interested in them through their backstories. And at the same time, there are plenty of very kind of action-packed, gory, gruesome, just gritty moments that keep you engaged in a horror story and just keep you feeling like, oh, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? There was one element of the story that I didn't enjoy because it just didn't make that much sense. It kind of revolves around this mystery that I mentioned, and I'm not going to spoil here because that would be messed up. It's a bit of a minor detail, and I imagine that it's something that Keith Rosson thought it kind of sounded like a sick idea to include in the story, and I think it was quite cool, but he didn't quite handle the execution right for it to work for me. There was also one other thing, which is that there was one character who was really interesting, a bit of a villain, that definitely should have had a backstory. I don't know why he didn't have backstory, because there was other characters that were more minor in terms of how things played out that did get backstories. So I felt like it was just a bit of a missed opportunity not to have something for him. There were a lot of elements about the story that I really enjoyed. The chaos, the character work, including the variety in the characters we get, kind of covering a lot of bases for society, the grittiness of the action. Just a couple minor things let it down a little bit for me. So overall, I rated Fever House 4 stars out of 5. So up until this point, I have been reading some pretty heavy horror books. I decided at this point in my spooky season reading journey to switch things up a bit with a more silly, fun, and light-hearted horror book. For this, I chose Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. This book is about Misha, a Hollywood TV show scriptwriter who focuses on the horror genre. He is mainly known for a TV show called Travelers, which is kind of like a Monster of the Week detective show. It sounds like a pretty cool premise, right? Things are looking really good for Misha because in addition to Travelers being successful, the short film he wrote has been nominated for an Oscar. Well, just as things are looking up, things must come crashing down. He's called into the studio CEO's room for a chat, and he's given an ultimatum regarding the finale, the season finale of his TV show. To either kill off his gay characters in the season finale, rather than have them finally profess their love for one another, or make them straight and keep them alive. He is given this ultimatum because the studio has this new algorithm, which works really well in increasing the company's profits, and it basically said, have Misha do this to make more money, or lose out on profit. This ultimatum drives Misha into a bit of a rage, and rightfully so. Capitalism and algorithms are forcing his hand by forcing him to give up his artistic integrity, especially in a relation that is so near and dear to his heart, queer representation in the media. I won't go too deep into it because I want you to discover it for yourself if you pick this book up. But it's a situation which really lets the reader be empathetic to what it's like for LGBT people growing up and what it's like for them in society. Now, I've said a lot about this book without really kind of mentioning the inciting incident and the aspect of this book that makes it sound really, really interesting. And that is that the monsters that Misha has written into his TV show Travelers and whatever other stuff he's written start coming to life. and they start targeting Misha and his friends. I think that's a fantastic premise for a horror book, and I really enjoyed the monsters with their variety and the role that they played in the story. Chuck Tingle is able to kind of mess around with this idea, play around with the concept, because the monsters have strengths and weaknesses built into them. As you know, basically everything does. Nothing can be overpowered and unstoppable, no matter how hard you try to write something like that. Everything has some kind of weakness. And Chuck Tingle is able to abuse these aspects to make the story interesting and fun. Um, there is kind of lots of like stakes and impact and kind of like how's he going to wriggle out of this one kinds of things in the story. Um, but so the way that he's able to kind of come out on top with these things is really creative and interesting. We get slasher movie kind of characters, elements of cosmic horror. All of the monsters and villains that we get in the story are really, really cool, and I really enjoyed the moments we got with them. One of my criticisms of this book is that I enjoyed this element of the story so much that I just wanted more. And so when it started to pivot to, move the plot along into whatever Chuck Tingle wanted to move it into, I was getting a bit disappointed. Not to say that what Tingle did with the plot was bad, because it was fresh, creative, interesting. It just went off a little bit from what I wanted in this story and made it a bit more serious than I was hoping for. One of my other criticisms about this book is in relation to the character work. I really liked Misha as a protagonist. Chuck Tingle did a lot to make him interesting, thought-provoking, and sympathizable, which I have now declared is a real word, because why isn't it? However, the other important characters in the story, being mainly his best friend and his boyfriend, don't really shine. They are just there to kind of act as victims to what happens in the story and aren't really that interesting. I think his best friend at least has something where she's kind of like a hacker slash cybersecurity expert, but his boyfriend, apart from being really supportive, basically just acts as a doormat. I think this is a great book that can really open your mind to how things are in society today in terms of LGBT stuff and the technological landscape, and it kind of beautifully merges those two things in a very gripping, captivating, engaging story, whilst also being very, very entertaining. So, despite the little criticisms I had, the book was just so incredibly entertaining that I can't go ahead and rate it anything less than a 4 stars out of 5. So, having refreshed my palate, I decided I was ready for another heavy one. So at this point in my spooky season, I decided to pick up Misery by Stephen King. This book is about Paul Sheldon, an author who, following a devastating car crash, finds himself under the care of his number one fan, Annie Wilkes. Paul Sheldon finds himself experiencing the full wrath and fury of Annie Wilkes because Paul Sheldon ended his trilogy by killing off the main character, Misery Chastain. So she tasks Paul with writing the 4th book and continuing the series, in which Misery comes back to life. One of the things that Annie Wilkes will not settle for is something BS happening. Something that just doesn't really work with the story, something that's a complete clash. If it doesn't make any sense, it's so unrealistic, she won't settle for that. So Paul Sheldon has to be very creative and essentially write himself out of a hole while appeasing Annie Wilkes, because you do not want an angry Annie Wilkes. Plot aside, this is an absolutely incredible psychological horror / thriller. Paul Sheldon is held captured, literally unable to move and run away, so he's forced into a situation where he has to play mind games with Annie for things to play out in his favor. It doesn't always work, and so he has to start strategizing his moves in a kind of risk versus reward kind of way. He has to find opportunities to be sneaky, to learn things, because obviously, without doing so, he will never escape. It's such a gripping horror novel because humans are the most unpredictable characters you can get. You can't reason with a slasher, you can't kill a ghost, but you can reason with a psychopath, kind of, if there is an incentive for them to keep you alive. And Paul Sheldon's incentive here is the book he's writing. These mind games are so thrilling to read about. I praised Pet Sematary earlier as having a fantastic character voice for Lewis Creed, but holy moly, did he do an incredible job with Paul Sheldon. I guess he was kind of forced into it because Paul Sheldon is very, very isolated throughout the story. And so his character has to carry the dialogue throughout the book, apart from the scenes in which Annie is also present. You know, a character is great when you get so absorbed into reading about them, talking to themselves. You can feel all of the emotions that he would feel in a situation like that, such as desperation, hope, optimism, anguish, anxiety, and insanity. His inner monologue is so powerful and has so much variety. It's funny at times, and on the complete other end of the spectrum, you can just feel how tortured he is about this situation. I've talked about how great of a character Paul Sheldon is. Well, you know, it's a story about two, and it takes two to tango. So Annie Wilkes is the antagonist in this book, and she is a phenomenal Stephen King villain. In fact, I think she is the best Stephen King villain and my favorite that I've read about so far. She's very intelligent, even though it doesn't look like she is. She's clever, she's cunning, she's adaptable, she's able to read people really well. She holds down her house, her fort, like a bear mother looking after her cubs. She has some sort of bipolar disorder, and so it's very interesting to read her moods because her moods swing like a pendulum between happy and optimistic to just feeling intense depression. So she's very, very interesting in that regard because you get so much emotion out of her, and seeing how Paul has to react to these emotions and navigate his way through her mind is just so, so good. And yeah, so Paul Sheldon just has to anticipate how to react and how he is going to play to a certain specific situation. The only thing that I didn't enjoy about this book was being forced into reading extracts from the Misery book that Paul Sheldon is writing. I thought it was a bit boring because obviously I haven't read the trilogy because it's, a fictional tale, so I'm not invested in the characters and stuff. Having to read those extracts sucked me out of the story, and obviously I couldn't just skip over them because I didn't know if they were going to end up being important in any way to what happens, and whether the chapter ends at the end of the extract or if it ends like halfway in and then Paul Sheldon has to, do something or something happens to him. So yeah, I mean, those extracts made me feel bored. It is a minor gripe because those extracts aren't super duper long, but they are long enough that they did start detracting from my enjoyment of the story. So overall, I rated this book 4 stars out of 5. Of Monsters and Mainframes by Barbara Truelove is the last of my spooky season reads. I was really tempted to read one more that wasn't on the original TBR because I had some extra time at the end of the month, but I had a library book that I needed to get through, so I ended up going against this idea. Might read it sometime soon. I was really, really interested in reading Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury because it sounds really, really good. But anyway, let's talk about what I'm here to talk about, which is Of Monsters and Mainframes, once again. Of Monsters and Mainframes is a book about a spaceship slash pilot AI called Demeter, who shuffles humans between Earth and Alpha Centauri, each trip taking approximately 6 years. That is quite a long time, knowing, human lifespans. It's kind of unique in its premise because the main character is a spaceship and not a human aboard the spaceship. The first journey ends in absolute disaster because it turns out that Dracula has killed off everybody aboard, which gives her a nasty reputation as a ghost ship. As the story goes on, Demeter ends up with a mission to kill off Dracula once and for all. It's kind of a Suicide Squad-esque kind of story in which we have a weird, vibrant, amazing cast of characters who are joined together in a cause, and they journey together to achieve this cause. It's similar to stories like The Devils, but slows down on the pacing just a little bit. What I enjoyed most about the story was the characters. We have Demeter, the pilot AI, Steward, the medical AI, a werewolf, an engineer, a pharaoh with otherworldly powers, and a fleet of cheerful spider drones. I won't speak too much about the non-AI characters because I feel like it's best to discover them for yourself, but I will speak a little bit about the AI. The AI have very different jobs. One is a pilot and one is a medic. They don't interact too much because of their different jobs. They're very invested in the different things they are doing. However, they do have a bit of a rocky relationship because they somewhat feel like they have each been screwed over by the other, which is a very interesting dynamic. I've never read or heard of a story in which you have two like AI things that are at odds with one another. The way that they feel about each other is weirdly heartbreaking. I wasn't expecting to get so attached to these two AI, and they don't work very well together, which is a shame considering the situations they find themselves in, where situations would have been handled much, much better if they did work together. However, we get some absolutely hilarious moments from each of them based on the situations they find themselves in. The way they react in their AI logic-based thinking are so good. There are some truly outlandish moments that had me flabbergasted that play on that idea of them being AI, as well as the fact that they are on a thing hurtling through space. The plot in its kind of macro is very, very simple, but don't let that fool you because the story is full of twists and turns. Things change and things are just so crazy and hectic and unpredictable that it's just kind of like a journey that you can throw yourself into and don't think too much about what happens, just enjoy the ride. In regards to that, it is also an emotional roller coaster. Good things happen, bad things happen, and you grow really, really invested in the ship. And so it makes it all the worse when these bad things happen and our characters have to band together to try and make the best of a bad situation. Barbara Truelove spends a lot of time fleshing out her characters and using them for jokes to make such an astoundingly feel-good, cozy book. You get to learn about these characters as they breathe through the page. There were a couple characters, though, that are super interesting from an outside perspective that didn't get near enough page time. I feel like the book could have been 20 to 30 pages longer to give them just a bit more time. It felt like there was some untapped potential there, and honestly, if I had that, I so could have rated this book 5 stars. So, overall, a fantastic book that just needed to work a little bit more on a few characters. For the characters she did work on, they were fantastic. So overall, I rate this book 4 stars out of 5. If you have made it this far into the video, you are the best, and thank you so much for watching all the way through. I hope that it is a sunny day where you live today. So that is my spooky season wrap-up video. I feel like I explored horror as a genre a lot more this month than I have before, and it's definitely making me excited to read more. For reference, I think last spooky season I only read 2 horror books, so it's a big step up going from 2 last year to 5 this year. I did read some throughout the year, but not that many. I've been delving a little bit into Stephen King. So yeah, I'm really excited to read more. Like, for example, I already mentioned just a few minutes ago that I'm really excited to read Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. And I've gained a couple really interesting sounding recommendations for Stephen King books I should read. That's being Desperation and Revival. So I imagine those three books might be the next horror books that I mention on my channel and do reviews for, so we shall see. So once again, I hope that you enjoyed the video and that you will press that subscribe button. I upload twice a week and do my best to get that content out for you. Have you read about any of the books in this video, and did you agree with my opinions? Have I convinced you that any of them are worth your time? I would also love to know what you have read for spooky season, and also what you're currently reading, so throw that down in the comments below as well. I aim to get a video out about other horror books I want to read, so join me next time as we hopefully discover some new bangers that we should all check out. And anyway, until next time, Rue out.